Welcome to Linden New Art's series of professional development seminars for artists. Our Artist Speakeasy series explores a range of topics throughout the year, and today we're talking about the Design Solutions program with Monash University. Tonight you're joining us live on Facebook and YouTube. There'll be lots of opportunities to ask questions, so please type your questions or make comments about the conversation in the chat. And our Events and Community Engagement Coordinator, Linda Studina, will monitor and highlight these questions as we go. Before we get started, let me begin with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we all virtually meet this evening. Today, myself and Myra Thiessen are joining you from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and while we meet virtually, this event draws on the ancient history of this land and follows the millennia of experiences of First Nations people coming together to celebrate, to learn, and to connect. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all First Nations people who are joining us. So, is design often gender biased? Why are products for women often coloured pink? Why are so many things made of plastic? How can we further embrace First Nations heritage into design thinking? The Design Fringe team have challenged Monash Art, Design and Architecture's emerging designers to ask bigger and better questions, to speculate and challenge common ways of thinking about the important and difficult themes that concern society. They examined how we live together, particularly when designing for inclusion, gender equity and safety, and sustainability. We're going to hear from the students about how they co-framed big problems and created productive ways to approach challenging discussions. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Myra Thiessen. Hi, Myra. Welcome.
Hello.
And thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Myra Thiessen is a lecturer in communication design in the Art, Design and Architecture department at Monash University. She has rounded experience as a design practitioner, educator and researcher with a particular interest in the social impact of design. Her research is focused on cultures of reading and learning, which includes an exploration of how people access, use, and interact with information, and the impact of motivation, context, and environment on reading and cognition. It's great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Good to be here. Thanks.
I'm wondering if you could tell us how this project started and the process that you took in bringing the working groups together.
Yeah, thanks, Juliette. Sure, I'm happy to do that. So we were lucky enough to partner with the Design Fringe for the development of this project, which was part of our Diversity and Inclusion Week at Monash. We have a strong culture of collaboration at Monash, and so I worked with my colleagues in design, so Jean Bodden, Dion Tuckwell, Robbie Napper, and Wendy Ellerton, to integrate this project structure into our honors degree coursework. So honors is a 4th year of undergraduate study that develops introductory research skills. And this year's cohort consists of a group of very capable, high-achieving students that represent both our communication and industrial design programs. So we approached this project by developing a week-long intensive program of workshops that explored themes related to inclusive communities, gender safety, and sustainability, and asked the students to act as documentarians of the event. Now, this was an opportunity for the students to participate observe and document discussion activities and arising themes, and to think about what this means for societies today and how we live together, and how we can design for better futures in response. So, and aligning with the honors coursework and learning outcomes, this documentation project was designed to explore the intellectual and contextual space design research occupies, and realize a design outcome that articulates the processes of research documentation, analysis, and interpretation. So in the design program, students must identify, frame, research, and realize their own projects. So they formed their working groups for this design fringe collaboration around themes that align with their own work and projects and research and their own research interests. They're working on problems that matter for society. So the themes that concern the design fringe also align closely with these interests of theirs. So it just kind of felt like a natural fit.
Yeah, wonderful. And we're lucky enough to have documentation from 3 intensive days of workshops and representatives from each student group with us this evening. So they're going to present some of the outcomes and experiences of the Diversity and Inclusion week-long program. And we have some short videos detailing the documentation and analysis that you mentioned about these themes and the discussions. So before we take a look at the videos, I'd like to introduce the Monash Design students. With us tonight are honours students Hannah de Boer, Marek Laubscher, and Naomi Rathi. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Now, before we jump into to having a chat with you about what's taken place, let's have a look at the videos. We're going to start with the sustainability project.
The How Are You Feeling workshop was facilitated by Ilya Friedman, Melissa DeCue, Ali Edwards, and Lisa Grocott from the Monash Emerging Technologies Research Lab. The workshop was conducted with the intent to research how understanding one's emotions can help create agency around climate change. As a group, we were all participants in this workshop. Today, we'll be unpacking each stage of the exercise and reflecting on our own collective experiences. The opening task of the workshop centered around the mood meter concept. Ilya introduced the source of this framework before allowing us to complete a quick survey. Participants were asked to attach a single word to describe their emotional response when confronted with the climate change crisis as a prompt. This word was then plotted on the mood meter graphic using Miro. A mood meter operates as a coordinate graph, with one axis being energy and the other being pleasantness. Following the plotting of our word or words, Ilya guided a discussion to explore the origin and rationale behind our responses. 4 people were included in this conversation. A brief introduction referenced the idea that this workshop will aim to help us better understand our emotions, which could allow us to then effectively take action into the future. The workshop in this moment was given a goal and direction. Feelings are inherently intangible. This task aimed to make these feelings tangible, physical, and visual to help participants come to terms with their emotion and transition towards taking action. The survey had limited prompting, which meant my response was not influenced or biased by the group or facilitators. This meant my response was honest and valuable to researchers. The Miro board that Ilya revealed after the survey was highly refined and visually enticing. Its visual clarity allowed us to quickly begin plotting our emotions and interpret them. Being able to visualize our emotions and how they fit within both axes helped me understand the meaning within my feelings. It also created a sense of community within the group, as our honest responses overlapped and linked in revealing ways. Ilya displayed his expertise in facilitating discussion. On reflection, this task had the potential to descend into an echo chamber of pessimistic complaints regarding our current climate situation. Certainly, when considering the group's responses as a whole, it's clear that the responses to the prompts were predominantly negative. However, Ilya was able to skillfully avoid this eventuality, guiding the discussion through deliberate choices of which presenter he called upon. This sandwiched negative responses with more hopeful insights. Ilya deliberately entered the discussion on an optimistic note, which subtly began to encourage participants to feel more energetic and positive. Calling on specific participants also kept momentum within the workshop. Facilitators who throw to the floor are often met with dead air and awkward silences, as participants are hesitant to share, especially in a Zoom room with its absence of non-verbal social cues. Leaving this task, I felt more positive towards the issue of climate change. I also felt I had a better understanding of how useful my emotional responses to this issue were. I also felt part of a group of people dealing with similar feelings and struggling with common problems. Our group did worry, however, that the way this task began could railroad participants too much. Asking users to select one single word to describe an issue as complex as our climate crisis is a big ask. Furthermore, if a user's response was a knee-jerk reaction, the word they chose might not fully do justice to their feelings. This word may colour the rest of the workshop experience for that participant, limiting the range of responses they could contribute to the exercise. I'll now hand over to Josh.
So I covered the visual mapping, which was the next stage of the workshop, where we would expand upon our mood meter emotions. We did this through creating imagery that would represent our feelings using floral components, which would make up a larger composition. We worked independently, unpacking and trying to discover what the purpose was behind our emotion. By exploring these emotions through imagery, we were able to discover other emotions, starting to reveal our deeper intentions. As we started to reflect as a group, we shared what we discovered. Each person was given a chance to discuss what we were starting to learn about that emotion, even exploring the traps of some emotions. For example, sadness might not actually be sadness, more so loneliness, kind of represented by this floating leaf. This sharing was great to start converting our emotions, our personal emotions. Some of us were also inspired by those with more proactive emotions during the sharing. So now I ask, what if? If we speculate around the idea of having greater variety of image to work with, much like the language used in the mood meter itself, the limited vibrant green images made it difficult for some of us to express our direct feelings. This did, however, force us to explore that in a more visual way. I'll now hand over to Brendan, who covered the next part of the workshop.
I covered the found objects design kits part of the workshop. Participants were asked to gather either waste materials from their bins or organic materials from a backyard or a garden. These were then used as visual aids to express emotions in the form of collage. This is very similar to the first visual mapping exercise. However, this was done with physical objects. Participants were asked to collage these objects into images in order to find ways to describe their feelings. Working with physical objects like these adds a level of tactility to the activity, allowing participants to think not just with their visually, but also think with their hands as well. There was a trend of a lot of participants changing their emotions from the first activity to more positive and optimistic ones, or at least there was a trend away from pure pessimism. This was led as some of the participants who shared in the first activity had better feelings about climate change and would guide the rest of the participants in that trajectory. I felt there was more engagement in the second part of the workshop. The first one was treated as a bit of a workshop, a bit of a warm-up, sorry. Different people were called on to share in this part, allowing all of the participants in the workshop to show what they were thinking and the emotions they had. This activity was also a good way of reducing Zoom fatigue by getting people away from their computers, even for just a couple of minutes. So what if? The selection of materials I felt could have been broadened, and this activity should have been differentiated from the first one a bit more, as there was no clear difference in purpose. Perhaps maybe just rubbish from the bins would have been a better choice. Not only would this make participants reflect on their consumption habits a bit more, but also would be different from the plants that were in the first part of the workshop. And also, what is the point of this activity? Is it just to allow participants to define their emotions, or is there something generative being produced in the background? I'll now pass on to Mark for the next part of this review.
Thank you, Brandon. So my part is about the reflection of the entire workshop. So what's this? As a successful researcher and designer, so reflective thinking and working is one of the most part of your design workshop and research work project. So either that is as a back to the metric diagram to showing how your motion move or shifts from the previous two activities. So the participants answer the question through dragging their newest position of their modes in this mode metric to showing where is newest position of their motion. And then we answer the participant and answer the question that following in the list. The first one is how your option changes and why this happened or not. The second is how will you action after the workshop. And the third is, did you mode change after workshop activities? Why or why not? And the last question is how the motion, the methods of participants' emotion and reaction contribution to your research skill or project. So through this conversation with the participant each other, we can note that some participants' emotion shift from negative to positive, all stay in the same position, and all have some other participant from the negative to the middle area. So this is the reasons why this the reflection here is just to communicate and elect each other to share their knowledge and experiences of this entire workshop. So here's the what if question. So the entire workshop is around one single emotion that's designed by the participant at the beginning of the workshop. And but during the entire workshop, we found that the participants will be change their emotion during these activities. So we can be encourage the participant to show up their emotion change through this workshop and always, so not in the very end of this workshop. So because the change or the shift of the emotion is a very, very important knowledge or the information for the researcher to gaining for the research project. So next, I'm following America to doing the final overarching conclusion.
Thank you, Mark. I'll now touch on the speculation of the workshop. The How Are You Feeling workshop, facilitated by Elliot Friedman, Melissa Duke, Ali Edwards, and Lisa Grocott from the Monash Emerging Technologies Research Lab, had the intention to research how understanding one's emotions can help create agency around climate change. This workshop facilitated the opportunity for attendees to the 2021 Melbourne Fringe Festival to investigate the intersection of design, emotions, and climate change through the use and integration of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence's Mood Meter while completing digital visual mapping and visual mapping with sound object design kits. Throughout the workshop, there was a range of different moments and methods to reflect on one's feelings, from Google Forms at the start and end of the workshop and intermittent mood meter check-ins after each making task. These reflections were the true outcomes of the workshop, prompting further conversation from the group. These group reflections, where people could share conflicting emotions, caused others' emotions to morph and change. This Melbourne Fringe workshop helped participants articulate the emotions currently felt around the climate crisis through the making exercises and group discussions, making the intangible tangible. Reflecting on these generated exercises and how they could help shift emotions demonstrated to attendees how design could impact one's emotions around climate change. Through both participating in and documenting the workshop, our team has reflected and speculated on how this workshop could be reimagined to not only help show the correlation between design and its ability to shift emotions, but to inquire how this workshop in its next iteration could empower its attendees to question how they could take action or make actionable changes to their day-to-day lives to change their emotions and relationships to climate change. Thank you very much.
Some very interesting reflections there. Now let's take a look at the gender safety workshop video to see how the students responded to a 20-minute design challenge.
Excellent. So who wants to follow on? Yes. Who would like to follow on?
I had like a similar concept. I went with the, wait, I'll just share. Where I was going into the people who, I haven't finished it yet, obviously, but the bit where only 30, like when I flipped it, like when it was like the 64% of LGBT people experienced like violence, I'm like, oh, that's not a fun stat to have thrown around. And like, I think anyone you'd get that and you'd be like, oh, well, that sucks. And so I was like, well, by flipping it, it can kind of be, I don't know, inspiring. You could be like, oh, well, only 30% of people haven't received it. Let's increase those numbers. So I was going to have it like, let's fill out all of the.
Yeah, that's great. So it's like a call to action in a way. So
yeah.
The rest of the rainbow. Cool. Because I think that the point that you make about for every step there's the flip side, which is kind of my point around the almost 62% in the marriage survey, is that there was another stat that needed to be acknowledged and considered. But you can flip it the other way too, like the way that you did in terms of, and it's kind of interesting the way that you can construct a narrative of either it being positive or. And I think what's interesting about what you did is that rather than dwell in this 66%, wasn't it? Rather than dwell in the 66%, that there's the 34% that can grow and become bigger. Thanks, Hannah. That was awesome. Would someone else like to go? Yes. See, if we were in real life, we'd all be hovering around a table. We'd be loudly clapping. There'd be noise, there'd be laughter.
I'm happy to throw something up.
Thanks.
Is that cool? Screen share. I took a bit of a play from like one of Walt Disney's sort of playbooks with like the haunted house and kind of having an experience in the queue. So I thought as people are queuing up to maybe enter a space or an exhibition, you could actually divide them out into two kind of statistic pools. And then before they enter, you present it to them, oh, you are, this statistic, or you're experiencing this statistic, so they can look around them and see the people around them and go, oh, this is how many people are actually getting affected. So I don't know how it would work or how actually the number would be delivered to them or that review would be delivered to them, but that's sort of that thought.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it's kind of an experiential representation of data.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you just hope that the people in this queue more so aren't feeling a bit ticked off that they're in the longer queue than the short queue, but queue.
Well, maybe that's maybe there is something about the experience of if it is about, because you can imagine what I mean. The 39% is representing the emotional state. and the way that interior experiences can kind of start to impact as well. So you could kind of see how just the spatial experience of being in there, but what was happening around you could actually really identify the 39% and the felt experience. Like it's actually what 10 minutes it would take or something for someone to go through that experience. Imagine if it's escalated to your everyday existence. So I think that's a really powerful way of thinking about data as an experience. So cool. Thanks, Josh. Yeah. Anyone else like to share?
I'm happy to go.
Thanks, Sharina.
So I did the women's stat one, the effort. Yeah, just gotta open this.
Nice to finally meet you, Sharina.
Yeah.
Communicating by email for about 6 months. But
Yeah, I know. Hopefully to see you in the flesh next time. So this one was mine, and drew on a piece of paper, and I thought about representing data for this as a conversation.
Yeah.
Using conversation, and this made me think about all of the convos that I've had with my friends, my peers, just in relation to walking at night. And it was a lot actually, and you would hear common things. Yeah, and I think that video that you showed, Jean, was it was really empowering as well, because some of the comments made, I could totally relate to it. And I was just sort of thinking about how could we use sort of conversation pinpointing some of these things that we say in regards to walking at night, and putting that onto a page in a way to represent data. And I did have a sticky note down the bottom of my work, that says 50% of women don't feel safe. I couldn't remember the full stat, but I was I don't even know where to put this thing yet, because I haven't. I was this could look completely different if I find another way. I don't know if I refine it a bit more, but thinking about where to put the actual quantitative data stat on the page as well was also the other challenging bit for me. But I thought of it sort of going down the bottom in a different color, but I
think for me, you've kind of represented it already. Essentially half the page has been filled with the lived experience. And what I think is also important about what you bring up is how important it is to embed yourself in those experiences, and therefore how important it is for the communication campaigns, all these processes that we're trying to get people to engage in, is that they speak to them. That they see or go, oh my God, I know exactly what that person means.
Yeah.
And there's a really interesting thing that I think also is worth kind of bringing up and kind of confronting, is that perceptions of safety are just as debilitating as real unsafety. If you feel unsafe, regardless of whether there's someone there or not, it's debilitating. You choose not to go there. So whether it's just feeling unsafe is just something absolutely worth acknowledging, that it feeling unsafe is unsafe. It's and in this sense of being able, it's like a conversation means it's also shared. It's you and someone else. And I think even in the times that we live in now, this is incredibly important. The only thing we can do is walk. The only thing that we're allowed to do is to be outside. And if that's being taken away from you because you're feeling unsafe, then that has to be addressed and extended into the world beyond COVID.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll keep sharing.
Yeah. Okay, yes. I'll make the noisy clap. Would someone else like to share? We've got a couple of minutes left. There's enough time for one or two more.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind. I did the same stat that Sharina did. Share my screen.
Okay.
So I took up your suggestion, Jean, of getting some old magazines, and I cut out the women featured in an old house and garden magazine, and just kind of shaded in half of that kind of population. But once I kind of put it together, I kind of felt it wasn't an accurate representation of everyone who shares that space. And I guess I just found it kind of intriguing having these women kind of being observed, a lot of them. I think there's only one group of women who are actually looking at the camera. So I think that kind of feeling of being watched or being something to be looked at. So yeah, that was kind of what I put together quickly.
No, that's great. I mean, I think that's a really interesting observation, that the semiotics that are embedded within the visuals of popular culture, because you've essentially taken like a popular magazine and cut out the representations of women as they appear in there. And that observation that most are looking away as if being observed, as if being watched. And in all of the stats that we collect, the leering or the sense of being watched is one of the most debilitating aspects of whether you're in a public space or a more isolated one. That sense of that someone's watching you is so terrifying. And yeah, I think that bringing that to the surface through just the notions of what popular culture images recreate is really interesting. So it's did you cut it up on your kitchen bench? And then
I just cut it up on the desk that I'm working at. Yep.
Oh yeah. Cool. Yeah, and I think the other thing that's really interesting too, that just the fact that you've collected a resource that's right at hand and looking through just how, again, popular culture represents and who is being represented in that magazine that, I think was you could kind of tell there's a predominance of white women in there. And it was like, this is the reality that we're confronted with in terms of the way women are represented in popular culture. And you've just exacerbated that, like, kind of brought that to the surface just with the collage that you created. So, yeah, really well done. Cool, yes. Noisy clap.
Out of curiosity, Jean, that stat, was it also asked how people felt just in public, not the after dark part?
Yeah, so there's actually if you go to the hypersexcity.com, or even to that report, which is publicly available, you'll be able to find lots of stats around public space and how women feel in different circumstances in public space. That's specifically around the dark, like being in the dark, but there's lots of around crowded spaces, deserted streets. There's a whole range of stats that are relevant there.
Wonderful. Some really valuable insights there and some quite shocking statistics as well. Lastly, let's play a short video created by the Inclusive Communities Working Group.
Created and introduced, which provided context of the collective focus of the day. This line represents the grounding exercise that got us to connect into ourselves and our body. Introducing ourselves was done through our roots by renaming ourselves as a grandchild of one of our grandparents. Connecting our roots with others by sharing the stories of our grandparent meant we got to know each other on a deeper level, quite literally under the surface. Once connections had been made through our roots, we showed who we are by renaming ourselves back to our actual names and adding our pronouns. Now that we'd grounded ourselves and connected with each other, the visual mapping activity was introduced to us.
The petals of practice are made up of the things we do, such as our work, research, hobbies, roles, and responsibilities. These are the things that we can see. We then asked ourselves what inspires us. What are the meaningful books we've read or experiences that have impacted our way of thinking? And who are the people around us that provide support, influence our decisions, and give us a sense of purpose? Next, we ponder the moods in our practice. We have all experienced a sense of uncertainty during this pandemic, but what other moods are occurring in our practice? Are there feelings of anxiety, fear, or optimism? And finally, the winds of change. What is changing in our practice? So now we must look inwards to reveal our ways of being and the things that we can't see.
Zooming into the center of the flower bud represents the core of who we need to be to show up to our practices. Who we are and how we practice our ways of being becomes a deeper reflective conversation that emerges. We learn to connect with ourselves by building knowledge around the experiences that we can't see. We ask ourselves, who are we as a person and how do we show up? What's invisible? What are the things that you do that people can't see? What is less visible that is harder to see? A reflective but also sense-making conversation happens, one that gives us the permission to lean into ourselves, unwrap the layers of who we are as a person, and give attention to the emotions, stories, and experiences that contributes to our way of being. What happens on a deeper level at the center of the flower is the experience that connects us to our petals of practice. In this moment of learning to reconnect with ourselves, we also build a sense of openness. It's an experience that allows us to use visual and verbal language to create conversation and build meaningful relationships with the people around us.
Stepping back and seeing that as flowers we have similarities that connect us, that we have similar petals, similar ways of growing, similar roots, and similar foundations. Which also reveals our differences, which can guide our understanding of community, connection, and inclusion. That inclusion and exclusion are connected, and forming these connections with each other highlights that together we are a diverse flower bed. By reflecting in on ourselves, our practices, and the things that have guided, influenced, and promoted our growth, it can reveal the things that have led us to grow and connect together, providing a deeper understanding of our practice and of ourselves. The foundation of self grew from the ground, and that although we may grow and bloom in different ways, we have all shared that growth. We can then take these understandings and the pollen of ideas that we've gained from this workshop and from each other, so we can pollinate inclusive communities elsewhere.
Excellent. I really love the way that the ideas have been visualized in these presentations. So good to see. Let's bring back our student guests again to have a bit of a further chat about the outcomes. Hello again, Marika from the Sustainability Working Group, and Hannah and Naomi from the Inclusive Communities Group. I might start by asking Marika, could you tell us a little bit more about the process involved with the documentation task and what kind of things you were interested in or grabbed your attention during the workshop, and how did they inform the way that you visualized the data and the outcomes?
Sure, thank you, Juliette. So as a team of documentarians, we really looked to capture not only the visual data that was being created throughout the generative workshops, but also really documenting the conversations throughout the workshop, as well as the reflections that these generative exercises really brought through. As was mentioned in the video, people's emotions changed based on these exercises that they did, and those reflections being shared throughout the group completely changed people's emotions from their initial ones for some participants. So as documentarians, we were really looking to try and actually document these emotions, which is quite difficult. So we tried to capture the visual data that they created and record those kind of reflections and discussions that were happening between participants and, of course, the workshop leaders.
And I might put the same question to the other group. Maybe, Naomi, we could start with you. What particularly grabbed your attention in the process?
Yeah, I think even though we were in a separate group, I think I actually echo a lot of Marika's comments in our process as well. I think personally what stuck out to me was the topic of inclusive communities and how the definition of inclusive communities really impacted the way I think we each responded to you know, our inspirations and the people around us, and, you know, the, I guess, outward and inward things that impact us, like using the analogy of the flower and the roots. Yeah, I guess thinking about, you know, what communities do we belong to, not just inclusive, but maybe the ones where we feel excluded from or more passive. Yeah, I think really getting to understand where you fit in within those sorts of communities and how they impact you really stood out to me and made me think a lot more deeply about myself, as well as the process of the project as well.
And how about you, Hannah?
Yeah, I remember when we kicked things off like a week before, we met as a group and we kind of planned out. We're like, oh, what do we think's going to happen? We tried to predict, and so all three of us were like FBIing Kirsty's like website for any sort of insight. But then, yeah, we get there and like all these predictions, we kind of got right that there was going to be introductions and then some sort of mapping activity. But other than that, we couldn't really be prepared for it. And I think that was the main takeaway for me, is that like when you are documenting, you don't know what's going to happen, but then the results that you do discover are really cool because you're like in the moment. You had no way of knowing that, you know, the conversation was going to lead in that way or anything like that. But then talking about it and reflecting on it, you're able to uncover all of these things. And even now and today, like talking about it yet again, more stuff is getting uncovered. So yeah, it's really cool.
Well, that does lead into my next question, and I might continue with you, Hannah, actually. So because, as you mentioned, for this project, you were both participants in the workshop as well as documenting the process as design researchers. Could you maybe reflect a little bit more on that experience?
Yeah, sure.
Did you, did you feel conflict in these two, you know, occupying these two roles?
It kind of felt like having like a devil and an angel on your shoulder. Like one person's like the participant in you is just like, oh, like listening to the tasks and everything and just doing the task. And then the other one's like, wait, did you see how they asked that question? And then you're like, shush, I'm trying to listen. And like, so you kind of got both those people talking. But at the same time, when you have those two, you get both the perspectives. Like, I don't think if I was a documentarian, I would have been thinking about, oh, why did Kirsty frame it that way or stuff like that. Like that was really important, like all the wording and like activities that she got us to do. And I don't think I would have consciously reflected on that if it hadn't been for that little documentarian on my shoulder. But then, yeah, then being a participant in some of the other workshops was also interesting, being able to just fully be immersed in that and then being a reflector of, you know, the practices and the activities that they got us to do. So there's benefits to both. And it was really fun being able to experience both of those forms. But yeah, I would recommend doing both, but yeah.
That's so interesting. And how about you, Naomi? Was there a conflict for you between occupying the two roles, or did it actually provide quite a good insight because you were doing both?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely some anxiety, like in that preparation week before, being like, you know, how do we strike that balance of, you know, participating to an adequate level, but still remembering things and not, because, you know, you forget things retrospectively that you don't necessarily pick up on at the time. So I don't know, I guess looking back to my honors project, I just kind of thought about how I am both a documentarian and participant within that, and how did I resolve that, and can I apply that to this project? So, you know, I'm quite an emotional person and something I like to do is really document my emotions on how I'm feeling at a particular stage in that process, and really, you know, thinking about why I felt that way. So I basically just did that in the project, and just thought, you know, for whatever reason, why did I feel that way? And then, you know, later on, for the more documentation side of things, I was able to really think, oh, well, you know, why did I feel anxiety, or why did I feel really good about this? Did this feel really confusing to me for some reason? So I think it worked really well for both ways. And I think also with the participation, it really made me think more deeply about the participation and yeah, where I fit within that presentation and project as well. So I think I got a lot more value out of it as a documentarian while doing participation.
I found it so interesting how a lot of the conversations did begin and continue with with emotion. I mean, it's such an important human faculty, you know, isn't it? I noticed that that was important in the sustainability workshop. Maybe Marika, you could reflect on this question about the dual roles of being participant and documenter.
Yes, sure. So as you said, Juliette, the objective of the workshop was really to investigate that intersection of design and emotions and climate change. All of these are huge topics. And of course, it was fantastic that everyone who did participate really was open to sharing their emotional journeys throughout the workshop. But as Hannah and Naomi articulated, it is a bit of a juggling act when you're both documentarian and participant. But I think for our team, because our workshop was so centered around documenting emotions, it was actually really quite beneficial to us and gave us real insight, because we as participants were going, oh wow, okay, that process really evoked this emotion or this change for me. And then when we were listening and documenting the other reflections that were happening, it was easier to pinpoint what other participants' emotions were and what their journeys were. So it was a lot easier to document those adjacent journeys of other participants.
I think you've begun to touch on the next thing I was going to ask about there, in terms of what you might have found challenging, or what you were particularly surprised by, or what you enjoyed with being part of this project. Maybe, Marika, we can continue with you.
Yes, so what was challenging, of course, I think the workshop leaders did a fantastic job of doing this in a virtual environment, especially in a workshop that was so centered around generative design exercises. So I think it definitely was a lot harder to document those emotions, simply because people can turn off their cameras or choose to opt out, which is good. But I think it would have been a very different experience if the workshops were held in person. So I think a big challenge for our group was actually trying to document in an honest and reflective way of other participants in a digital medium.
And Naomi, how did you feel about it? What were some of the challenges, and what did you enjoy about being part of it?
Yeah, I think the biggest tension going into the project was, you know, how do we empower people to talk about such potentially really personal experiences? It was personal for me anyway. But I think, yeah, the way we were led into those conversations, the way we introduced each other, you know, by saying, you know, I am, you know, ex-grandparent person, like, you know, and being able to relate to each other in that way. And then, yeah, also that option of having your cameras on or off if you wanted to, like, because, you know, we're inviting people into our personal spaces, which kind of becomes a public domain, and that might not really be comfortable for some people. So I think, yeah, that was the greatest challenge going in, but there was this real universality about some of the topics. And like, I remember Marika was in my group actually, and I remember I was saying something that I was not really comfortable necessarily saying to her prior to that experience. And then she said, yeah, I totally feel the same. So yeah, that tension was completely gone in just by talking to each other.
Of course, it's so good when you can find a commonality and work together like that. How did you find it, Hannah?
Yeah, good. Thinking of Naomi's thing with the grandparents thing at the start of introducing yourself, we had to like change our name in the Zoom chat to the grandparent of someone. Then we got into our little breakout rooms, and then that was such an interesting way to get to know other people, because it was just you were getting to know people through someone else, if that made sense. You're like, oh, I loved my grandma, we did all of this together, rather than like that never would have happened to be like, hi, I'm Hannah, I'm an honours student. And that's probably where I probably would have finished my little introduction. But with that, I was able to tell all these stories about my grandma, and then someone else would share theirs, and we would see that we had connection of loving being crafty with our grandparents, you know. And then, yeah, the visual mapping activity was just the metaphors that Kirsty used for our islands of practice and the winds of change and all these really evocative kind of words around
being able to draw these really emotional sides out, but having such a fun way to do it was really important. Like, I think if you ask, oh, who influences you? I'd be like, oh, I don't know, I'd write a few names down. But when you say, oh, look up and draw the stars, who do you look up to and aspire to be? I'm like, oh, this is so cool. These are all the people in my sky. So yeah, the use of metaphor, I think, was really surprising to me of how powerful it was in like kind of encouraging like more to come out of me, I guess.
It sounds like a really transformative experience, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Look, the next question, Myra, I might come to you after I've spoken to the students about it, if that's okay, because I'd be interested to hear your answer to this too. The question is, what value do you think documentation has for design research? Naomi, we might start with you.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I really document a lot on my emotions, so I can only really speak to that because that's what I know best. But I think that really puts a lot more focus and brings back the researcher into the research, which I think can really easily get lost sometimes. I've certainly felt like I have been a bit detached from my research at times. So I think, yeah, I mean, if there's a particular tension, you know, really asking myself, why does it feel that way? You know, is it because I'm not happy with the direction this research is taking, or, you know, is something not working for me for whatever the reason, but I don't know what it is, I just feel it. Yeah, I think being more aware, I think, of your emotions in a documentative way really helps to add depth to research.
Absolutely. And how about you, Marika?
I think the role of documentation in design research is really vital. You can see that reflected in the sustainability workshop. Of course, just record keeping in terms of all that generative design outcomes is very important, but also documenting those emotions, which otherwise is really hard to quantify. You know, so actually having those qualitative materials written down, documented, actually captures that moment. And I think, especially for this workshop, because it was one that was really focused on the participants' life experiences and their personal journeys, I think being able to document that is something that would be very hard to remember even post the workshop if you didn't document it.
Yes, of course. And Hannah, what do you think the value is there?
Yeah, well, as someone, so my honours project, I'm doing it around sharing in communities and making it easier by providing those foundations. So part of that, I've set up a bookshelf in my local park, and I've called it the Borrow and Share Shelf, and people have been adding stuff. So part of that has been me scooting down to the park and taking photos of it, like daily. It's been 70 days now. And so, yeah, it has such rich data, which I never would have remembered. I totally would have forgotten half of the things that have been shared. But then having it all sit by each other, you can kind of draw conclusions and you can see similarities. You can be like, oh, wait, this looks similar to that, or this puzzle that was shared yesterday probably prompted someone to share their game today. So, yeah, I think it's a really rich way of just like not only just collecting it to help remember, but then you're able to draw new knowledge from it, I guess, which has really helped with my project at least. So yeah, really like conscious effort. Documentation is really useful for design research, I reckon.
Oh, super. I'm sure you believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah,
Myra as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have any further comments to make about it?
Yeah, I do. Thanks. But you know, to be honest, each of our students here have touched on some of the keywords that, you know, I've been madly writing down for myself so that it doesn't fall out of my mind. But you know, I think the truth is that you know, design is a social practice, and that means that we need to understand the landscape and the scope and people on a wider level. So the documentation gives us the data to do that, and it allows us to step outside ourselves in that situation and look at the broader experiences of people, how we fit into there, but also how it fits within the wider society. So, you know, I think it's essential in that sense to give us that broader perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you, Myra. I'm watching the clock, of course, and we just have 5 minutes left, and I'm looking to see if we have any other questions that have come in from the people viewing. Whilst I'm having a look, would anybody like to jump in and suggest anything that they might have done differently were they to do this again?
I can go.
Yeah. Thank you, Naomi.
I mean, to be honest, I'm really happy with how things went, to be honest.
Right?
Yeah, I think for me personally, though, I would probably be maybe more analytical of my emotions, because I think maybe I could have been too emotional as well. Like, emotions are great and identifying that is great, but if you don't analyze it, then it's not really very helpful either. So I think, yeah, at the actual time of going through that illustrative process with Kirsty, if I maybe wrote a note down of, why did I feel this way? Not just I felt happy at this moment. I think that probably, yeah, would have given me a lot more depth into understanding myself a bit better as well.
Does anybody else have any further thoughts about things that they might have done a little differently? Or it seems like you were all really actually very inspired and happy with how things went.
Yeah, if anything, it's just given me what to do next time. I feel like it was just like a great learning experience. Like, I wouldn't change anything because now I know how to do it.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'd like to really thank you, Marika, Hannah, and Naomi, for sharing your ideas and your thoughts and your responses to this whole process. It's really been very interesting to find out more from you and to see your presentations. So thank you. Good luck with all of the studies coming up that you might have. I'll say goodbye for now.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Amazing. Thank you. Myra, I just wanted to ask you as we're finishing up, what's next for Design Solutions? What's next for the working groups?
Right. So, well, we're now coming to the end of the academic year, and so the students are finishing up with their honors projects and with the coursework. So I would just like to say that their work, so their larger honors project, is going to be in our end of year exhibition, so Mada Now, and I'd like to just invite everybody to come along and check it out. It will be on an online gallery at the Monash Art, Design and Architecture website from the end of November, I believe. So it'll be there for access, which then along with the other undergraduates as well. So Monash Design, and certainly I, welcome the opportunity to work with Design Fringe again next year. With Melbourne's lockdown, we needed to pivot quite late in the game from in-person program of workshops to online. And although the event was really excellent in that it hosted a range of truly brilliant workshop facilitators, I really hope that we can realize the program in person. I would also just like to take the opportunity to recognize the facility and agility of the honors students who participated in this project. Their resilience and capacity to respond with such care and attention and intelligence in the face of the uncertainty that we face these days is truly admirable. So I would just like to thank them all.
That's really important to recognize. It has been very hard for students throughout this whole thing. So yes, I do want to take this opportunity to thank you so much, Myra Thiessen from Monash University. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight and letting us find out more about this amazing project. Good luck for the future of it. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. And I'd also really like to thank our wonderful interpreters tonight, Paul Houston and Mark Sandon, doing a fantastic job. Thank you. And I do also need to thank the supporters who have made this possible, as well as the fantastic team at the Melbourne Fringe Festival. Our supporters are the City of Port Phillip, Creative Victoria, the Naomi Milgram Foundation, Victorian Women's Trust, and of course our education programme partner, Monash University. And thank you everybody for joining us tonight as well. You can catch our current exhibitions by Natasha Bieniek, Ruth Hofflick, Vipul Srivalasa, and Carolyn Menzies on the Linden website, that's lindenarts.org, where you can also join our mailing list and keep up to date with the other upcoming exhibitions and events that we have in store. Thank you all for joining us and have a good evening.